Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our very first episode of our new educational webinar series, Yough Talks. My name is Em Huff. I'm a community organizer with Mountain
I'm Em Huff. I'm a community organizer with Mountain Watershed Association.
Perfect. My name is Lindsay. I am the outreach and education coordinator for Mountain Watershed, and we're really excited to welcome Alex to chat about the bird atlas, and he's going to be telling us all sorts of awesome stuff.
Yeah, hi. I'm Alex Busato, and I have a little bit of an about me in my slides, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Um, yeah, so I'm going to be talking about birds in Pennsylvania in general, and then also a little bit more specifically about an ongoing project within the state called the Pennsylvania Bird Atlas. A little bit of my involvement and kind of some highlights about the region. But a little about me, just to get started. I am currently a middle school science teacher at the Valley School of Ligonier. I'm also the chair of the Westmoreland Bird and Nature Club. And for the Atlas, I am the Fayette County coordinator for this project. I've been into birding for about 7 years now, and photography along with it. So I have dove headfirst into this hobby, and it's taken me to a lot of cool places. And I'm really happy to be involved with these two projects here. So, um, yeah, just to get into things, what is a bird atlas and this project that's ongoing? So, a bird atlas is a way of mapping kind of what birds are in an area, in this case, specifically within Pennsylvania. And it's a map of abundance, and it's defined by both time and space. So, when birds are in certain areas and where within the state they are. This is Pennsylvania's third atlas that they've conducted, and they're repeated every 20 years. And these are really, really, really important tools for the agencies that help to manage the conservation of birds within our state. The Game Commission is the agency that's charged with managing all of our different avifauna within the Commonwealth. And so this project is a partnership between them, the Hawk Mountain Group, which is out in Schuylkill County, Pennsylvania, and then also a lot of different volunteer groups throughout the state. So it's a pretty big project, and it is really wide-reaching and important. Here's just some examples of the previous ones. So we did one from 1984 to 1989, and then again in 2004 to 2009. They go for 5 years at a time. And so our one that we are currently in began in 2024, set to wrap in 2029. And we are also this year doing something that we've never done before, which is in addition to you can see these say breeding birds in Pennsylvania, we're also tracking what birds are using our state in the winter. So we're doing a winter atlas portion, kind of doubling the effort, but it's going to give us some good data and show some important trends. So this is sort of what the final format will eventually be of all the effort. And then within these different publications, this is a little bit grainy of a screenshot, but you can see we can produce some different maps using all sorts of these different data points, temporal and geographical distributions of different species. This one being a pretty common one, pileated woodpecker. So you can see they're found across the majority of the state, although there are a lot less of them in like the Philadelphia area down here that you can see. So, yeah, this is sort of the end goal for the Atlas. As I mentioned before, why are we doing this? They're really our most comprehensive tool. I mean, there's 5 years worth of data that goes into these, and they're really important for species that are not always on everybody's radar. So for example, we kind of know, the distributions of cardinals and robins and some of our more common ones. But when it comes to things that are only breeding in certain habitats within our state or only within certain small subregions, this one is called a Henslow's sparrow. They're kind of grassland scrubby specialists. This is a golden winged warbler up top. They are like primary succession forest specialists. And so these are some of several that we're trying to focus on more because they're rare in our state and they're more in need of some conservation focus. And at the end of the day, the more data we have, the better we can act to conserve different species. So, yeah. And then what the Game Commission will do with this is they use this data to revise different conservation statuses within the state. Something's showing to be, on the rise, we might downgrade it from threatened to, not threatened. If something is on the decline, we might increase that. And so, and then also to identify some important areas and habitats, land use changes, prioritization within the Game Commission, and to make a more informed population of people out there looking for birds. Yeah, so lots of different benefits from this type of study. Without going too far into like the nitty-gritty of how the actual process of atlasing works, I thought we could just kind of talk about some of the ones that are in our area, some things that we've been noticing with the atlas so far, and just things that anyone who's starting to get into the hobby in the Laurel Highlands region might expect to see. So this time of year is actually one of the best times of year to go birding, although it can be pretty overwhelming at times because we're getting a lot of different migratory species that are just arriving or passing through. But the Laurel Highlands has a lot of really great diversity. Within Pennsylvania in general, there's been over 450 species that have been documented. Not all of those stay here. There's many that have just sort of passed through or are incidental, like one-offs that have just shown up for one reason or another. But there's about 190 species that are like regular breeders within the state that you can expect to see pretty much every year. Breaking that down a little bit by region, Westmoreland, we have 305 that have been documented, and then Fayette and Somerset are a little bit less, 266 and 298 respectively. Yeah. So for the atlas, we're looking at not just those rare detection species, but all sorts of species. These are some examples of some of our most common ones that we see across the state: Canada geese, American robins, and then this is a black-capped chickadee. So even these common birds are ones that we want to look for. They're indicators of environmental health in a lot of different ways. They're relying on insect populations and plant populations and all sorts of things. So if we have a good breeding population of birds, it's just a good indication that we have a healthy ecosystem overall. So these are some of the ones that you'll see pretty much wherever you go. A little bit more specific to some of our areas, some of our river valleys in the Laurel Highlands are really fantastic for bird diversity, supporting a lot of different and sometimes less common species. So the Yough River Gorge and then the Indian Creek Gorge are both really great locations for some of these river valley specialists. Up top here, this is one of our biggest birds of concern in the state, called the cerulean warbler. They rely on a lot of like unbroken tracts of woodland, and so this was taken along the Great Allegheny Passage near Layton, and it's a really great spot for them. There's a lot of unbroken woods there, and there's a pretty good population. Some other ones that are a little more common, we have Baltimore Orioles. This is a young Baltimore Oriole along the gap. And then yellow-throated warblers. And this is a bird, very, very special bird to me, called the Louisiana water thrush, that are very reliant on these streams. Really, really interesting species. So yeah, lots of waterways that support these things. In our deep woodsy areas, we have a lot of other species. This is the scarlet tanager, one that a lot of people know. Really, really bold and brilliant bird to see out in the wild. And they rely on a lot of those unbroken tracts of woods as well. Some that are a little bit more difficult to see but are around. We have hooded warblers. This is a young black-throated blue warbler in the center. And then on the right-hand side here, we have ruffed grouse, which is our state bird, but unfortunately very difficult to come by these days. I actually did see one for the first time in a couple years in the Laurel Highlands a few weeks back, which was pretty exciting. But some areas where you can expect to see some of these birds, like Forbes State Forest is a really great location, lots of different access points. Quebec Run, which is near the southern border in Fayette County, and then Ohio Pile with lots of different trail accesses there. In the Laurel Highlands, we have some unique high elevation species that you don't find a lot of other locations within the state. The top right here, we have a bird called a veery, relative of a robin. It's a higher altitude thrush within our state. They have an amazing song that you can hear if you go early morning or toward the evening up into some of our ridge tops. We have magnolia warblers, which really stunning coloration on these guys. And one that a lot you can see them passing through, but we do have some populations that breed at our high elevations. This is a young dark-eyed junco, very common bird in the wintertime, but we don't see them very often in the summer. They have a pretty restricted breeding range within the state. And then this is another one called the Canada warbler, which similarly has a pretty restricted range in those high elevation areas. So these are all ones that are kind of special to the Laurel Highlands. We have a lot of open areas too, farmlands, meadows, where we get some familiar ones like the turkey. The killdeer, this is another pretty common shorebird that we see, although the killdeer are in decline across the state in general. So they're one that we want to keep a close monitor on for the atlas and just in general. Then we have some other ones that are a little less common. The American woodcock here on the left. And then this one is called the grasshopper sparrow, which is a pretty specialized species. They're a lot more common out west, but we just lack a lot of the open habitat that they require. So in areas where these are present, it's a priority to kind of understand what they're doing. Wetlands. We don't have a lot of wetlands in our area, but those that we do are usually some of our most biodiverse when it comes to different birds. A lot of birds rely on water sources in general, and the wetlands provide, the water as well as a lot of excellent habitat and diversity of plants and insects that help to support them. So Mill Run Reservoir has some really nice areas. The Jacobs Creek wetlands, Donegal Lake, and Green Lake reservoir, all sort of in our area, and you can see different types of birds there. This is a yellow warbler. They're one of our more common in the center here. Eastern kingbirds on the left, and then some that are really reliant on the water, like our wood ducks. And this bird up here is called a Virginia rail. They're one of our less common breeders as well, really reliant on these marshy type habitats. And then everybody loves birds of prey. So we do have lots of birds of prey around here. They're pretty much found all over. Some, preferring to be nearer to water sources or nearer to open fields, depending on what species. But we have lots of different owls. These are all taken within the Laurel Highlands. These are baby screech owls. This is a young barred owl on the left. We have great horned owls on the right here. And then in the center, everybody loves bald eagles. We've seen a really amazing uptick of bald eagles, especially along like the Yough River over the past couple decades. So these are ones that are overall doing pretty well, even in some of these urban areas around the state. And then for our area specifically in Fayette County, this is a pretty exciting development that's come as part of the Atlas, but we have our first state record of a species known as the Swainson's warbler. They're pretty nondescript, pretty skulky. They stay low in the vegetation. But this was first documented a few years actually before the Atlas, but has continued through at Bear Run Nature Reserve in Fayette County. So this is pretty exciting, and this is just some of what the Atlas work can show us. It's a way to concretely document that these new species are arriving in our state, or have been using our state under our noses without us detecting them previously. So yeah, and I'm excited because I'm Fayette County coordinator, so that's it's cool that it's in my county. um yeah. So just some general trends for the Atlas so far. It's hard to tell the trend when we're in the middle of the data collection, but there are some preliminary things that we've been noticing, both with this and with some other data sources. As far as the progress goes, we have this is a map showing the distribution of some different effort within the Atlas surveys. And so a little bit of background on that. These are almost all volunteer based. There's a few paid employees that travel throughout the state as part of this project, but the vast majority is relying on individual volunteer birders going out and collecting the data themselves and submitting it. And so far, Westmoreland County, we have about 110 confirmed species that we have seen are breeding there. Fayette, we have 105, and same with Somerset. And the goal is for each one of these blocks you can see on this map to be in the 40 plus effort category minimum. There are some that are in Allegheny County that are far beyond that already. But down here in Fayette and Westmoreland and Somerset, we have a few that are definitely on the lower end of that for right now that we're hoping to work through as the Atlas continues. In order for us to consider this Atlas to be a success, we need to focus on getting the following parameters in each of these different blocks. And I could talk about what each of these things means individually, but at the end of the day, it's just a lot of effort. So there's about almost 5,000 blocks across the entire state. We just divide it up on a grid method, and within each, we need those 40 plus hours, plus 2 hours at night, plus at least 70 species that we document, with at least 25% of those being confirmed as breeding in the block. So it's a lot of hours, it's a lot of effort, and it is a lot of fun at the same time. If this is your thing, if you're into data and if you're into birds, it's pretty easy to participate, but and the project needs as much participation as we can get, really. So yeah. And so if you are interested in helping out with this project, if you're a person that likes to bird, especially if you're already on this website, eBird, if you aren't, join, because it's really cool. But really all it is that you just need to observe a species in your area, note if there's any sort of behaviors which are kind of outlined on a different, like there's a guideline section. Note any behaviors that are present, and then just log it and submit it. And so if any of you are interested in this, you can contact that email there. That's my email for the program. Or there's lots of resources online as well. And if you're not into birding, but something like this sounds interesting, or if you want to be a birder, I mean, it's really easy to get started. This is one of the fastest growing hobbies in the nation right now, especially among younger people. And there's lots of really excellent resources out there to get people started, whether it's like a field guide type app, or I like some of the physical paperback field guides as well. Merlin is one that's getting a lot of people into the hobby, though, this app by Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And then also there's a lot of really excellent groups around. As I mentioned earlier, I'm the chair of the Westmoreland Bird and Nature Club, and we're very open to pretty much anybody. There's also ones in Pittsburgh, the Three Rivers Bird Club. There's the Todd Bird Club in Indiana. There's not one dedicated to Fayette, but Westmoreland, we kind of cover that group. And so there's lots of resources and very knowledgeable people that are always willing to help out some interested newbies get into the hobby. Um, I will warn you, it's a pretty slippery slope, but you don't need anything fancy to get started. You can always borrow somebody else's fancy scopes or things like that whenever you're out and about with these clubs. So yeah, and that's my formal presentation. I know you guys might have some questions, or we can go back to anything within the slides. But thank you.
That's awesome. So thanks for hanging out with us, telling us about the PA Bird Atlas. I have just a quick question. How did you get involved with the PA Bird Atlas specifically? Like if, let's say, there's someone who wants to be more involved than just like finding or like helping with the eBird stuff, like in the next Bird Atlas, if someone wants to be a coordinator, how do they get in
Yeah,
with that?
that's a great question. So, I was approached by some friends within the hobby. So when you get into birding, you'll find that you're running into the same people over and over again, and there's sort of like names that come up throughout the state. And because so much of this is volunteer based, it's like if somebody who's volunteering knows you and considers you to be a good birder, they'll often pass things along. And so it was sort of just a word of mouth thing. My involvement with the Bird and Nature Club, we had some folks in there that were they had been involved in previous ones. They were getting involved in this one, and they were saying, hey, we're trying to fill these county coordinator slots. Would you be interested in potentially taking that on? And so, um, yeah, I just went for it. I live right near the border of Westmoreland and Fayette, so it was easier for me than some of our other club members to like be in the area. Um, which as coordinator, I don't have to like, the expectation is not that I cover the entire county or anything, but it is helpful if you're nearby, because you do have to sort of monitor the progress that is being done and like where um you can try to fill in some of the gaps that some of the other people that are volunteering more passively like are missing, I guess. So yeah, if you're interested in being involved in the next one, I mean the next one, poof, that would be, I guess, like 2044. um but there's still 2 years to get involved with, well, really 2.5 years to get involved with this one. So, yeah, send me an email if you're interested. And I can't put you on as a coordinator, but I could put people on as like dedicated to one or several specific blocks. If it's your backyard turf type of thing, I have a couple people that are like, don't worry about these ones, we got them covered. And that's really nice to like just have that, pass that along to somebody else. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, so you weren't kidding when you said starting birding is a slippery slope. You started 7 years
Yes.
ago and then got networked really well within your club, and now you're
Hmm.
one of the coordinators for a really wonderful project. So it sounds like quite a lot of our native birds are being impacted by um, like losing their habitat. Could you speak a little bit more to that? Is that one of our biggest threats to our native birds?
Yeah, I would say so. Really across the board, yeah, habitat loss and habitat fragmentation is what most experts are pointing to for like the declines that we are seeing. Across the board, not every species is declining, but the majority of them are on that trend, especially a lot of our migratory species. And a lot of it comes down to the fact that many birds are very specialized for certain niches. So I mentioned, I can go back to the beginning here. I mentioned some of these like these species. Our golden winged warbler is a great example. They're really reliant on a lot of like primary succession, like meadow transitioning to woodland type habitats. And so, it's a pretty specific habitat requirement. And if we break those up, if we fragment those, if we have invasive species that overtake those sorts of areas, which they often do, then like we start to see that whole niche start to disappear. Henslow's sparrow is another one, and even more so than the Henslows, these guys in the middle, the grasshopper sparrow, I know of an area that these were locally for many years, and then it was developed into an Amazon warehouse. So it's like these types of things, and it can be large areas that are being broken up, or it can be even just small little patches. But because they're so reliant on these individual habitats, anything affecting those can do a big number on the breeding population. And the other thing is birds. A lot of birds in Pennsylvania just pass through, but as they're passing through, they really need these sort of um, unbroken corridors of suitable habitat where they can be feeding and refueling and not facing additional threats. And so, we've seen issues with that as well, where the habitats do still exist, but they're just less or they're fragmented, and it's more difficult for these species to follow those corridors as they move through the state. Um, so yeah, I mean, habitat loss is a very complicated issue, and you could point at different factors for different species. But overall, yeah, I would say that that's probably our biggest threat.
Yeah, and is climate change impacting our birds as much as they are for all sorts of different other species?
Yeah, definitely. It's the climate change impact is, I mean, I think across the board, um, it's really diverse, what's happening where. One
Mhm.
of the biggest things that we're starting to see with a lot of the different bird species is that there's sort of a disconnect in timing for our migrants when they're arriving base or versus when a lot of our plant and insect activity is kind of hitting its peak. So these birds, many of them are coming from Central America, South America, where they've been overwintering, and they base their migration times a lot on like day length and different factors that are kind of constant, around the globe. I mean, a bird in Belize has no idea what the weather's like in Pennsylvania, and so it's coming up at kind of the same time that evolution has selected for over the years. Whereas up here in Pennsylvania, if we're having a warmer than average spring, which this year we're actually not, but you know, uh, it is the trend overall that we're getting an earlier and earlier like leaf out and bloom and insect emergence, because a lot of those are based off of temperature and soil temperature and air temperature. And so what a lot of species are facing is they're arriving ready to to nest and to rear their young, but they're missing sort of these peak insect emergences that have historically supported their numbers. And so in the course of 1 year, that might mean you lose one chick, right? And so you have four chicks instead of five that make it to adulthood. But over the course of many individuals and decades, that can really add up if to a pretty serious decline. And so we're still kind of working out the details of that right now. I mean, climate change is an actively developing situation. But yeah, it's definitely of concern. And then the other interesting thing that goes along with that is we're seeing some range expansions as well. The Swainson's warbler here, you can see their historic range is the southeast. We get some up into West Virginia, but typically not near to the border. Um, and so, seeing these now not abundant, but at least present within the state, as well as some other species, we're seeing a shift just northward of a lot of different ranges of some of our resident and shorter distant migrants. A lot of our birds that only migrate a short distance in the wintertime and not all the way to the global south, like catbirds, eastern towhees, even like robins. We're seeing a lot more overwintering in our area than we have in years past. Um, and so the Winter Atlas is hopefully going to shed even more light on that whenever that finally gets through the publication phase. Because that's another developing situation is how these ranges are shifting with changes in climate.
So with all of these changes happening, what can we do like at home in our gardens or just like what can individuals do to really help these birds have their habitat, to help these birds like have space to migrate through, that type of
Mhm.
thing?
Yeah.
Well,
Well, yeah,
and
I mean, there's.
adding on to that,
Oh
sorry,
yeah.
adding on to that, bird feeders, bird baths, bird houses. Are these things good ideas? Are they helpful, or are they dangerous disease vectors? And if they're good things for birds, how can they be done responsibly?
Mhm.
That because I know that we all love seeing our backyard birds. I know I do, but wouldn't want to put the birds in danger from cats or disease by having bird feeders. So if you
Mhm.
could also shed some light on that, that'd be great.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'll start with kind of the first question, but so I mean, we talked about how habitat loss is one of the major factors affecting this, and the easiest way to combat habitat loss is to reintroduce the habitat, right? For birds, the vast majority rely on native plants and the insects that follow suit. And so within your property, if whether you have a large plot of land or whether it's just a small backyard, any sort of native planting that you can do is going to be a net benefit. I used to work for the Audubon Society of Western PA, and they had a program called the Backyard Habitat or Certified Backyard Habitat Program. Um, and basically it was this idea that any addition is going to help to support the bird populations. If a whole suburb full of people have these native plants in their backyards instead of just these sterile lawns, then it's recreating, at least to some degree, those natural corridors and those natural food sources. So yeah, I mean, introducing uh wildflowers, shrubs, trees, water features, kind of anything that you are able to that's going to simulate those natural ecosystems is going to benefit them greatly. Um, as far as the question of like supplementing with some artificial things like bird feeders, bird baths, um, bird houses, I think there's varying levels of support that those can offer. Um, some birds actually exclusively rely on bird houses here in Pennsylvania. The purple martin is a good example. Pretty much the entire East Coast population of purple martins is nesting in artificial houses. Um, don't really know why that they've just gone full into that, but they really have. Out west, you have some that are in natural roosts, but yeah, so like purple martins, that's a specific one. Other ones like bluebirds can benefit. Tree swallows certainly take advantage of a lot of like nest boxes, and then you'll also get things like wrens and every once in a while chickadees and things like that that'll go after the cavities. um, I find that if you want to support like birds breeding in and around your property, probably what's more productive is again to supply the sources of nest material and the food that they rely on. I don't know of very many songbirds, if any, that feed their chicks seeds when they're young. They're oh, goldfinches do. But other than that, a lot of them feed them insects, even if they're like a seed or fruit eater as adults. And so again, having those plants to support the insect populations, having things like brush piles, or even just leaving your dead garden like over winter, so there's that supply of the dead grasses and things like that for them to use to make their nests. All of those things can add up in to support the breeding. I would say more so than a nest box. Nest boxes generally aren't hurting anything, but you do have to be careful about placement, making sure you're putting them away from potential hazards like, um, you know, outdoor cats are a big one. Snakes can often get up into nest boxes if they're in an area that's like a little bit easier to access. You want to make sure they're higher off the ground, things like that. Um, and then also that you're maintaining them, cleaning them out every year after the nest season is done and not letting all that material stay inside of it. As far as bird feeders go, I think bird feeders are great to watch birds. And there's a lot of folks that, I mean, there's still some debate about this, but I think the general consensus is that birds don't become reliant on the feeders. They use it as just a supplement to their natural diet. And so sometimes you'll have, a day like we had this past winter where their natural diet is very limited by hard packed snow or heavy winds and other types of less than ideal conditions. And so on those days, you'll see your feeders a lot more loaded with different birds trying to get an easy meal, not waste that energy. And so I think in the wintertime, especially, that can be a really valuable source of giving something, helping the birds in a tangible way. When it's nice out, I mean, even in the winter when it's nice, I tend not to see many visitors to my feeder, or at least much less. And that's because they're out using different food sources, some of their natural food sources. Um, there's lots of different nuances when it comes to bird feeding, what you're using and when you're putting it out and things like that. In general, um, as long as you're keeping it relatively clean. You mentioned being a vector for diseases. Like that's the main thing you want to watch out for is, especially now that we have like some serious cases of avian flu going around. They don't seem to be affecting the songbirds nearly as much as some of our larger birds, but there's always that chance when you're bringing different species in close contact that you can spread something. So every once in a while, especially when it's warmer out, making sure you're replacing the seed, making sure you're like wiping down surfaces with like warm soapy water or even like a little bit of bleach in the water to disinfect those surfaces for the visitors. And then same thing kind of goes with bird baths, right? Just making sure you're changing the water, not letting it get gross and stagnant. But I do think all of those things can be a benefit as long as they're done in a responsible way, as like the manager of it.
Awesome. Cool. Um, so along with like this like vein of being responsible about birds, right?
Mhm.
Um, what are some good guidelines and etiquette to follow when we're first getting into birding? What are the best practices? For example, when we do studies on reptiles and amphibians, a lot of the times we'll remove the metadata or the location of the species that we find so that people don't go and bother them or even collect them from,
Mhm.
their habitats. And additionally, like aside from removing the metadata, what are some we don't want to be out bothering birds. We love birds. We don't want to stress
Mhm.
them out. We don't want to like, scare them away from their nests or their good feeding sites. So how do
Mhm.
I know if I'm crossing the line of bothering a bird versus just observing and appreciating a bird?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it definitely has different answers depending on who you ask. In general, my rule of thumb is sort of like if you find yourself in the situation where you are noticeably altering the behavior of a species, then it's probably approaching the line that you don't want to intentionally go further with. So, when you're out and about, I mean, most people when they go birding, they just kind of pick a trail and they just sort of walk it and see what they can. A lot of times you're not knowing what you're going to come across. Um, and you're looking into these different situations based on where the bird is at that time. And so, um, you know, I do think it's very different than like reptiles and amphibians, just because they do move around so much more in general. And overall, they're not severely affected by anyone's presence for, within reason, right? When they are nesting, that is one time when you do need to be like especially aware of your impact on them, making sure that like you're not spending prolonged amounts of time near a nest, to the point that the parents aren't able to visit on their regular schedule, or making sure that you're not getting so close to a nest that you're stressing out the young, stressing out the parents beyond what is reasonable. That said, there's some birds that will like build directly next to people's houses, their nests, and it's like they're fully getting contact with people all the time, and they seem to do just fine with it. So it depends on the bird for sure. Songbirds are certainly a lot less sensitive than some of our other ones. And then yeah, just the context of how you're doing it. One thing that is also a good rule of thumb to avoid, and this one the jury's really out between birders, and that's the use of like audio playback. It's super tempting, as especially as a photographer, to like want to play a song and get the bird really close to you and like looking and curiously. What that does is it just simulates a rival coming nearby into their territory, and it spikes their cortisol levels and makes them really stressed for a good amount of time afterward. And so there are some times whenever we're doing surveys where playback is necessary for detection, but usually is like your average bird watcher who's not really out there to do these scientific type studies. We want to avoid using audio playback. The Merlin app, unfortunately, I mean, it's a good feature to reference, but it also has a whole library of calls, and so there's a lot of people that take advantage of that, and it like don't really realize the stress that they're putting on the species when they do that. So that's one thing that I always try to avoid, and to tell other people to avoid, um, is audio playback. And then just being aware of certain sensitive species. So like this Swainson's warbler is a great example. It's the only pairing that we know of within the state, so we probably don't want to dissuade them from staying in the state. Other ones like a lot of our birds of prey. So owls will roost in the same area for several years sometimes. And that makes them especially vulnerable to like harassment. A lot of people love to see owls. It's really cool, but if you see an owl, you usually want to refrain from saying exactly where you find it. Um, because they even though they won't often show the stress in the moment, that repeated prolonged stress can sometimes it can even be fatal. Snowy owls, when they show up in the wintertime out in the central part of the state, sometimes, I mean, they'll be harassed by well-meaning birders and photographers, and even just everyday people that happen upon um these crowds of people with binoculars looking at them. They'll get stressed to the point that they can't eat, and they just they'll pass away a lot of times because of the stress. And you don't notice it in the moment, but it's you thinking about how many other people are going to do that same thing, and impact that bird. So owls and other sensitive species, I usually refrain from posting those immediately, or I will just obscure the location. So I was out and about this past weekend in the middle of nowhere, Forbes State Forest, on like a logging road, and heard a barred owl, and I logged it, because if I put a 5 mile radius, the odds that somebody's going to be able to find that thing is pretty slim. Whereas this top picture, the screech owl, was taken in Frick Park in Pittsburgh, and this one happens to be a very well-known location. The word has gotten out on it for sure, and it's in a spot that you can't easily get too close. But it is one that, like, I probably would not have said exactly where this one was if it had not already been a widely known spot. Um, so yeah, it's a judgment call every time, but I think that just like I said, watching for behaviors that are indicators of stress, avoiding that playback, and then just being selective and making um, that call when it comes to reporting some of our more sensitive species. A lot of the other ones, I mean, the best thing about birding is how much people share where the species are. So, um, you know, you want to be mindful, but at the same time, I'm not in the camp of let's gatekeep all these the best spots to myself type of thing. Like I really enjoy sharing some of the locations with other people. There's like an entire PA Discord with rare bird alerts and things across the state that people are really good at sharing. And so that's part of the fun of the community. And I do think that the majority of birders fall into that camp of wanting to be respectful in their viewing. Um, Actually, I mean, the photographers, which I am a photographer, but the photographers tend to be the ones that push the boundaries a lot more than the birders, I guess, even though there's a lot of overlap. But yeah.
One more question about being responsible about birds.
Mhm.
So it's almost a season for finding baby birds on the ground,
Mhm.
right?
Yes.
I used to volunteer at an avian rehab center, and quite frequently around this time of year, people would start bringing in baby birds that they'd found and were very concerned about, but actually probably didn't need to come in. They
Mhm.
were old enough to leave the nest, but still hopping around on the ground. And then we'd have to gently explain that they'd accidentally bird napped a baby, So, what should I? But it is good to rescue birds also. So, what should we do? Like, what should people do if they find a bird on the ground? What are like
Mhm.
the guidelines for does this baby bird need help or not? Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, there's this is a good question because yeah, it does come up a lot. But it really comes down to just like having a base understanding of sort of the developmental process for a lot of our different species. So, birds kind of come in two main flavors. There's precocial young and altricial young, and I always get them mixed up which one is which. But one of them is basically ready to walk around and kind of follow their parents out of the egg. So a lot of waterfowl, like the goose on this slide, or killdeer, a lot of shorebird species, they have the type that well, as soon as they hatch, they're already in that wandering around stage. A lot of these birds nest on the ground or in some somewhat precarious locations, and so it's really important for them to be able to get up and moving pretty soon after birth. A lot of our songbirds, on the other hand, have the other type. I think it's precocial. um, they have the other type where they're going to remain in the nest for a defined period of their development to be fed by the parents. So, like a robin or a chickadee is a good example of these. Or I think it was my first slide. Yeah, these ones right here. This is a blue-gray gnatcatcher. These guys are going to remain in the nest, and this is usually what we think of when we first think of like a baby bird. If you find a bird, and I actually don't think I have any pictures on here, but everybody has probably seen those like little, like featherless, pink, eyes closed, alien looking young of these types of birds. When they're in that stage, if you find them out of the nest, uh, that is the time when they are not really able to be out of the nest. And unfortunately, a lot of the time, if you find one out of the nest, it's probably already a little bit too far gone. Um, Accidents do happen. Some of them can blow out of the nest. If you can find the nest and reach it, you can always try to put them back in it. There's a really common misconception that like the mother bird will be able to like smell your oils from your hands. Most birds have almost no sense of smell at all. And so you can totally, like, if you find one that falls onto the grass and it seems to be doing okay, uh, try to place it back into the nest if you can find it. Um, a lot of times when they're in those early stages, they're just not gonna make it for very long without uh being incubated or fed very rapidly. And so that's pretty unfortunate. But Other times they will even be booted out of the nest like intentionally. Sometimes birds will lay more eggs and hatch more young than they can actually rear successfully. One example I know is of a seagull species called the kittiwake in Alaska. They'll nest and they'll usually hatch like two eggs, but they can't rear both of them. So the chicks will like kind of fight each other to the death. It's a little morbid. But then it ends up raising, the more successful one. And for that species, that's just evolution's way. But getting back to the if you find one, most of the time people find them in this second life stage, which is what's called a fledgling. A fledgling is not typically able to fly, or at least not able to fly as well as the adult can, but they're very near that stage. So these robins here are very near the fledgling stage, uh, where they will leave the nest and be on the ground, just kind of roaming around for a couple of days before they start to take into the trees a little bit more. Um, this is when most people find them, and they look really weird. They look sick because they're just like missing a bunch of feathers as they're still growing in. They don't really fly, so people assume that there's something wrong with them. And that's when they pick them up. In reality, the mom and the dad are usually nearby, and they'll frequently visit to feed the different fledglings as they kind of bop around from like cover to cover, trying to stay away from predators during this stage. Um, and if you do find one of these on the ground and you just stand near it for long enough, you'll probably notice one or more of the parents show up and start yelling at you to get away from their young. Um, and yeah, this is just another example too. This is a chickadee fledgling. There were about five of these guys just hopping along. This was at Laurel Hill State Park, right along the trail, and they were just hopping around. And so, um, totally could understand why somebody would see this and be like, "Oh, it's lost. It's injured. It needs help." But the parents were just up in the tree a little bit away, and we got to see them actively feeding these guys too. So, yeah, in general, just don't pick them up. Just leave them where they are. They're going to do their thing. And sometimes they won't make it, and at the end of the day, a lot of times that's just kind of part of nature's design. If you find, the one exception I would say is if you find something in an especially vulnerable position, like if you see a baby robin hopping across the road or something like that, or on a busy trail, um, anything like that, try to move it as close to its original position as you can while getting it out of the immediate threat. Um, yeah, unfortunately, a lot of our infrastructure is not very wildlife friendly. So that would be like the one exception that I would say would be a good move to move them around. But yeah, overall, just they're kind of doing their thing. So
Hey, so our very last question is, what do you love about birding, and what do you love about getting out and taking your photographs? What really like makes you smile and brings you joy about this hobby and about this topic that you're rapidly learning more and more about?
yeah. Well, I mean, I think so. I've always really been into nature. And birds they're unique in that there's like enough of them to keep it constantly interesting, right? There's enough around that I never really truly know what I'm going to see when I'm out and about. But at the same time, it's like there's not an overwhelming variety of them in any one area to the point where it's like I can't keep track, right? If I was into beetles, which I mean I like beetles, but like there's far too many beetles for me to like go out and be able to recognize in the field. And so birds are kind of that sweet spot. They're when they're there, they're usually pretty uh not easy, but a lot more detectable than a lot of other species are. They're flashy, they're interesting with their behaviors, they're really variable in their body's form and all sorts of things. And so like from the biology taxonomy perspective, I always geek out over all of that. From the photography side, they're just really dynamic and interesting subjects. Where literally every time you see one, it's going to be in a different background, a different behavior, just that slight tilt of the head, a little bit different is like what you're always chasing. And so, yeah, I got into photography around the same time I got into birds, and they're one of, in my opinion, the hardest subjects on land, at least to photograph. But it's really worth it when you get like those money shots. And so that's what keeps me going out. Just seeing what's in our area, finding, new species and exploring, and then trying to document them and all their little nuances is what gets me out and about. So
There's actually one more question.
okay.
Surprise.
That's okay.
What is your favorite bird that you can see in the Laurel Highlands?
Yeah, so that's a good qualifier because it's nearly impossible to pick a favorite bird. But I think if I had to pick, the one that I most enjoy seeing every year is this guy right here. This is the Louisiana water thrush. Really horrible name for this bird because they are neither thrush nor from Louisiana. They were described by one that was migrating through, but they really thrive in like middle Appalachia here. They're reliant on these fast moving cold water streams where they're eating a lot of like macroinvertebrates and things. And so my background is very heavily tied to watershed science and just being out in my stream in my backyard type of thing when I was growing up. And so like these birds are they're not the drabbest, but they're certainly not the most flashy bird species that we have. But their behavior is just so endlessly fascinating to watch. I mean, you can see in this picture, they'll walk through these whitewater rapids and like all sorts of things. And they're also one of the very first migrant species that we have arriving in spring. They'll get here like first week of April usually, and they have this beautiful melodic song that they sing really, really loud because they have to sing over the rapids. And it's always just, it kind of brings you out of that seasonal depression when you hear these in the spring, that migration's coming on. And yeah, so lots of reasons that the Louisiana water thrush is my favorite in the area. I think they should be Pennsylvania's state bird personally. If only Louisiana wasn't in the name. But the Utah has the California gull as theirs, and they make it work. So I think there's a shot. But yeah, it's just such an amazing species and one that's super reliant on what we have here in the Laurel Highlands, these high quality watersheds, and yeah, so
Wonderful. Yeah, we got to see and hear the Louisiana water thrush at our Birds and Blooms. So, folks who are listening, come to Birds and Blooms next year. It'll probably be April 17th in 2027. And we are so excited that Alex was able to join us. And Alex, good luck with the remaining years of the Bird Atlas. And we'll definitely see you really soon.
yeah, thanks.